Let's go back to that breaking news now. Peter Dutton has confirmed the coalition will not reveal a new 2030 emissions reduction target before the next election. Joining me live now is Liberal frontbencher Senator Andrew Bragg. Andrew Bragg, thanks for your time. Will that fly with the electorate, not having a target for where you want to take the country in terms of emissions?
Well, I think that we have been very clear that there will be a target, and that's net zero 2050. And that has always been our policy. And we've always said that we would stay in the Paris Agreement. So I think some of this commentary has kind of got ahead of itself. And I think what people are looking for is our long-term commitment. It is very hard, and it's going to be very hard to get to net zero, but we are remaining committed to that key target by 2050.
Are you comfortable, though, with not having a midterm target to take to the people?
Well, obviously you want to show that you're on the pathway, and my sense is that the Labor targets are probably not on track. And so what we do for 2040 and the other years in between 2050 will be announced, I'm sure, before the election. But I think the key point here is, are you going to be in Paris or out? Are you going to be in, and are you going to be in net zero 2050 or not? And we're in on that as well.
You've said that you're sure there'll be targets for 2040 and so on before the election, but Mr. Dutton today was pretty clear. He said, when it comes to targets and what we said, we'll work that out after we're in government. That's it.
Well,
that's
I'm sure
pretty much at odds with what you've said there.
I don't think it is. I think it's really the point that there's going to be a lot of policy needed to actually get to net zero. I would say that Australia is a country that has always had policy to support reaching an ambition. That could be a target, it could be a set of particular arrangements, and that will all be dealt with before the election. I'm sure people will know exactly what they're voting for or what they're voting against before the next election. I'm very sure that Ted and Peter will have this all worked out, and that people can go to the ballot box knowing that we are committed to the long-term goal here, which is to get to net zero. And there'll be some information and detail about how that will be achieved.
But with not necessarily specific targets. Is that your read on what Peter Dutton's saying? Because he said that he's not going to, when it comes to a target, he says, we'll work that out when we're in government. But you're saying there needs to be other detail to be fleshing out the pathway to get to net zero.
Well, I mean, you have to show how you're going to achieve something. I mean, ultimately, we're in the Paris Agreement. We signed Australia up to the Paris Agreement. We're in for net zero. So we'll have to show people how we're going to do that. And I'm sure that will be forthcoming. Don't forget, we voted against the Labor Party's 43% target when the legislation was presented in this term of Parliament. So not a lot of this is new, is my sense, Kieran. We voted against the bill. We've not been big supporters of legislating targets. And in fact, when we've been in government, we have announced our international commitments at these fora, but we have not sought to codify them into domestic legislation because that's not essential.
Does the vacuum, though, in terms of having a target for 2030 or those midterm targets, does it open up the room within the coalition for voices like that of Matt Canavan or Keith Pitt, who are arguing we should get out of Paris, your fellow coalition colleagues?
Well, I don't think that the party and the coalition is going to leave Paris, so I'm not worried about that. And most people who look at this closely will look for two key points. Are you in Paris, and are you in for net zero 2050? And the answer to both questions is yes. The rest is noise.
So, okay, they're the two main points. So you're not as harsh on the government for its 2030 target. The argument that they're going to fall short has been condemned by Ted O'Brien and Peter Dutton.
Well, that's their approach. I mean, we haven't favoured codifying these international agreements into domestic legislation. And there are a lot of other countries that agree that's not always necessary. So just because you legislate something doesn't mean it's going to happen. I mean, Labor's got a 1.2 million new houses target. They've got no chance of meeting. So sometimes targets aren't worth all the effort people spend on making. frankly, what really counts is actually getting the outcome.
Sophie Scomps says you've given up on those Teal seats. I asked her today on this program, do you feel that they've given up? And she says 100% they've given up on seats like hers. What do you say to that?
Well, that may well be in her political interest to make that statement, but we've always been a party that sought to govern for all Australians, and that's why we are committed to net zero, and we are in fact the party that signed Australia up to the net zero agreement after a lot of internal debate. So that is an important policy for a lot of people who live in seats like Mackellar. And I think ultimately that's what people will be looking for. Are you in these international agreements and are you doing your fair share or are you not? And I'm sure that we can give them a categoric yes